At 21:40 hours on May 31st, 1940, Lieutenant Commander Robert Maxwell stood on the bridge of HMS Saracen watching black smoke rise from Dunkirk's burning oil tanks 12 miles across dark water. 34 years old, 16 years Royal Navy service. Zero experience evacuating armies under fire at night. The destroyer had been designed for anti-submarine warfare and escort duty. She displaced 1,350 tons, measured 323 feet stem to stern, carried 145 crew and four 4.7-inch guns. Her maximum capacity for troops was officially 200 men. Maxwell had orders to bring back 900 in one trip. Through waters infested with German E-boats, U-boats, mines, and Stuka dive bombers that would resume attacks at dawn. The Admiralty called it Operation Dynamo. British Expeditionary Force soldiers trapped on French beaches called it survival. German commanders called it target practice. Maxwell called it impossible. But impossible was the only option left. Vice Admiral Bertram Ramsay had launched Operation Dynamo on May 26th. Initial projections estimated 45,000 men might be saved over 2 days before German armor crushed the defensive perimeter. 5 days later, 197,000 soldiers had been evacuated, but 140,000 remained on those beaches. Exhausted, dehydrated, under constant bombardment. The Luftwaffe had sunk 6 Royal Navy destroyers in 3 days. HMS Wakeful torpedoed on May 29th, 640 dead. HMS Grafton torpedoed. Minutes later, 35 killed. HMS Grenade bombed and sunk the same day, 108 casualties. HMS Keith, Basilisk, and Havant destroyed by Stukas on June 1st. The Admiralty had withdrawn the 8 newest destroyers from Dunkirk operations, too valuable to risk. That left older vessels like Saracen, ships with worn machinery, tired crews, and commanders who understood they might not return. Maxwell studied the charts spread across the navigation table. 3 routes from Dover to Dunkirk. Route Z, the shortest at 39 nautical miles, passed through waters now thick with German mines. Route X, 55 nautical miles, took ships within range of German coastal artillery at Calais. Route Y, 87 nautical miles, added hours to the journey and burned precious fuel. All 3 routes were death traps. The difference was how quickly you died. Saracen would take Route Y. Darkness provided some protection from air attack, but darkness also hid mines, concealed E-boats, and turned navigation into guesswork when lighthouses had been extinguished and buoys removed. Maxwell's executive officer, Lieutenant James Hartley, approached with the latest intelligence report. 29 years old, former merchant marine officer who'd transferred to the Royal Navy in 1938. 2 years destroyer service. He read from the typed sheet. German artillery has extended range to cover the eastern beaches. Stuka attacks concentrated on ships at the mole between 1400 and 1800 hours today. 3 transports hit, 1 sunk. RAF, Fighter Command, flew 8 patrols. Luftwaffe still owns the sky after dark. E-boat activity confirmed off Gravelines. U-62 operating in the channel. Magnetic mines detected along Route Z. Weather forecast. Scattered clouds. Wind southwest at 8 knots. Visibility 4 miles. Sea state 2. High tide Dunkirk, 01:45 hours. Maxwell checked his watch. 1:42 hours. High tide in 3 hours. They needed to reach Dunkirk before the tide turned. Destroyers drew too much water to approach the beaches at low tide. Missed the window and soldiers would drown trying to wade out to the ship. If you want to see how Maxwell's decision turned out, please hit that like button. It helps us share these forgotten stories with more people. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Maxwell. Saracen cast off from Dover at 22:05 hours. The destroyer slipped past the white cliffs into darkness. Behind them, Dover Castle sat on the heights where Admiral Ramsay coordinated the entire evacuation from tunnels dug into chalk during Napoleonic times. Ahead lay 87 nautical miles of hostile water. Maxwell ordered speed 18 knots. Faster would save time but burn fuel they needed for the return journey. Slower reduced the chance of hitting mines but guaranteed they'd miss high tide. 18 knots balanced risk against reality. The ship's 4 boilers were online, steam pressure steady, main engines functioning normally despite 6 consecutive days of operations with minimal maintenance. Saracen had made 4 trips to Dunkirk since May 27th. Each trip brought back between 600 and 800 soldiers. Each trip pushed machinery closer to failure. Chief Engine Room Artificer Thomas Bradford reported from below decks. The port reduction gear was overheating. Normal operating temperature 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Current temperature 165 degrees and climbing. Bradford recommended reducing speed to 15 knots. Maxwell refused. They had 3 hours to cover 87 nautical miles. 15 knots meant arriving after high tide. Bradford returned to the engine room with orders to keep the machinery running regardless of temperature. The crew knew what was at stake. Saracen passed through the Goodwin Sands, a treacherous shoal marked by buoys that Vice Admiral Ramsay's staff had laid to guide the evacuation fleet. The destroyer followed the marked channel in darkness. Navigation lights were forbidden. German bombers would target any visible ship. Maxwell navigated by dead reckoning, compass headings, and the experience of 16 years at sea. At 22:47 hours, the radar operator reported a contact, bearing 285 degrees, range 3,000 yards, speed 25 knots, closing. E-boat, German Schnellboot, fast attack craft armed with torpedoes and 20mm cannons. They hunted at night, targeting ships silhouetted against the burning horizon of Dunkirk. Maxwell ordered hard to starboard. Saracen turned away from the contact. The E-boat altered course to pursue. Range 2,500 yards. The destroyer's main armament couldn't depress low enough to target a fast patrol boat at close range. The 4.7-inch guns had been designed for surface combat against other destroyers and U-boat deck guns. The E-boat closed to 2,000 yards. Maxwell ordered the aftergun crew to fire star shells, illumination rounds designed to light up the night. If they couldn't shoot the E-boat, they'd blind it. The 4.7-inch gun fired. The star shell burst 800 feet above the water. Magnesium light turned night into day. The E-boat commander saw his silhouette exposed against dark water. He broke off the attack and retreated into darkness. The star shell burned for 45 seconds, then died. Saracen continued toward Dunkirk. Maxwell noted the encounter in the log. 2,251 hours. E-boat contact. Evaded. 1 star shell expended. They had 180 star shells remaining. And 87 nautical miles still to go. At 2,320 hours, they crossed into French territorial waters. The glow from Dunkirk's burning oil tanks became visible on the horizon. Orange flames reflected off low clouds. Smoke rose thousands of feet into the night sky. The entire port was burning. Hartley studied the scene through binoculars. "Sir, how do we even get close to that?" Maxwell didn't answer, because he didn't know. The briefing in Dover had been clear. Approach from the northwest. Follow the channel markers to the harbor entrance. Proceed to the eastern mole. Load soldiers. Depart before dawn. Simple on paper, suicidal in practice. The eastern mole was a concrete and timber breakwater extending 1,400 yards into the harbor. It had been designed as a protective barrier, not a dock. But with Dunkirk's main quays destroyed by bombing, the mole was the only place large ships could embark troops directly. Captain William Tennant, senior naval officer ashore, had organized loading operations with ruthless efficiency. Soldiers formed queues 4 abreast along the narrow mole. Destroyers tied up alongside. Troops climbed down rope nets and gangplanks. Ships loaded 800 to 1,000 men in 20 to 30 minutes, then cast off and ran for Dover while the next destroyer took its place. The system worked until Stukas found it. On June 1st, German dive bombers sank 3 destroyers at the mole. HMS Keith, flagship of the 19th Destroyer Flotilla, took 4 direct hits and capsized with her captain still on the bridge. HMS Basilisk and HMS Havant followed her to the bottom within hours. 250 men died. The Admiralty suspended daylight operations at the mole after June 1st. Night evacuations only, which meant Maxwell was heading into darkness to find a damaged pier, load 900 exhausted soldiers, and escape before dawn brought the Stukas back. Saracen approached Dunkirk at 00:15 hours on June 1st. The destroyer reduced speed to 8 knots. German artillery at Calais had the range to hit ships in the harbor approaches. Maxwell ordered the crew to battle stations, all watertight doors sealed. Damage control parties ready. Medical section prepared for casualties. Soldiers would be brought aboard any way possible. Some would be wounded. Some would be shell-shocked. Some would be too exhausted to climb. The crew needed to be ready for anything. The harbor entrance appeared through smoke at 00:32 hours. Wrecked ships littered the channel. Saracen's navigator, Sub-Lieutenant Peter Walsh, counted 8 visible hulks. Masts protruding from the water, funnels at odd angles, bow sections barely above the surface. The destroyer threaded between wrecks, following a path Walsh calculated by comparing known wreck positions from earlier trips against current observations. One mistake would put Saracen on the bottom. At 00:47 hours, they entered Dunkirk harbor. The scene was apocalyptic. Buildings along the waterfront burned. Rubble blocked streets. The main dock area was a crater field. Cranes lay toppled. Warehouses had collapsed. The smell hit everyone on deck simultaneously. Burning oil, cordite, rotting flesh, unwashed bodies, and seawater. The smell of an army dying. Maxwell steered toward the eastern mole. The structure appeared through smoke, running northwest from the burning town. Concrete pilings, timber decking, iron mooring posts every 100 yards. And soldiers, thousands of them. They lined the mole 4 abreast, standing in patient columns that extended back toward shore. British troops mostly, with French soldiers mixed throughout. Their faces were hollow, eyes sunken, uniforms filthy. Many had abandoned equipment. Rifles lay scattered on the mole. Helmets floated in the water. They stood and waited, because waiting was all they could do. Saracen approached the mole at 00:53 hours. Maxwell brought the destroyer alongside at 4 knots. Too fast and he'd smash the ship against concrete. Too slow and the current would push them off. He needed to maintain just enough speed to control position until the ship was secured. Hartley commanded the deck crew, 6 sailors with mooring lines. They threw lines to soldiers on the mole. The soldiers secured the lines to mooring posts. Saracen came alongside at 00:56 hours. Ropes went taut. The ship settled against timber fenders. Maxwell ordered engines to full stop. Lieutenant Hartley dropped the gangway. Soldiers began boarding immediately. They climbed down from the mole onto Saracen's main deck. The first man aboard was a sergeant from the Royal West Kent Regiment, uniform torn, face black with soot. He saluted Hartley, then collapsed. The second man caught him. The third stepped over them. The fourth helped lift the sergeant toward the medical section. The fifth kept climbing down. They came aboard in an endless stream. Maxwell watched from the bridge. He had ordered 900 men. The sergeant on the mole was loading them 4 at a time. The gangway could handle 8 men per minute. At that rate, loading 900 would take nearly 2 hours. They didn't have 2 hours. Dawn came at 05:15 hours. Stukas would follow 30 minutes later. If Saracen was still at the mole when the sun rose, the destroyer would die there. Maxwell ordered Hartley to increase loading speed. Hartley rigged additional rope ladders over the side. Now soldiers could board from 4 points simultaneously. The main gangway, 2 rope ladders amidships, and a cargo net at the stern. Loading rate increased to 32 men per minute. But 32 men per minute still meant 28 minutes to load 900. And that assumed soldiers could climb without stopping. Reality was different. Some men were wounded. They needed assistance. Some were so exhausted they couldn't grip the ropes. They had to be hauled aboard. Some panicked halfway down and froze. Others had to push past them or pull them down. At 118 hours, German artillery opened fire. The first shells landed 200 yards north of the mole, 150-millimeter rounds from German batteries at Calais. The shells walked south. Each salvo came closer. Soldiers on the mole pressed flat. The loading stopped. Maxwell ordered the deck crew to keep moving. The soldiers stood and resumed boarding. The shells kept falling. At 1:23 hours, a shell hit the mole 50 yards from Saracen. The explosion killed 8 men instantly. Others were blown into the water. The destroyers. Searchlight operators spotted men thrashing in the dark. Maxwell ordered boats away. 2 motor whaleboats dropped into the water. Crews pulled struggling soldiers from the harbor. The loading continued. At 01:31 hours, Maxwell counted souls aboard. 687 soldiers. The ship's designed capacity was 200. They had packed 687 into spaces meant for a fraction of that number. The main deck was solid bodies. The mess decks were full. Men filled the passageways. They sat in the engine spaces. They crowded the gun positions. Every available space held soldiers. And still the sergeant on the mole sent more down. The artillery barrage ended at 01:34 hours. German gunners were firing blind in darkness. They'd resume at dawn when spotters could see. Saracen had maybe 3 hours before daylight. Loading continued. At 01:47 hours, high tide. The water level was at maximum. This was their best chance to load and escape. After this, the tide would fall. The destroyer's draft would increase relative to water depth. Getting out would become harder with each passing minute. Maxwell checked the count. 823 soldiers aboard. The deck crew reported the ship was listing 3 degrees to port from uneven weight distribution. Bradford reported from the engine room that men were sitting on the main steam lines. The pipes ran at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Bradford asked permission to move them. Maxwell refused. There was nowhere to move them. At 01:58 hours, the sergeant on the mole signaled, "Loading complete." Maxwell counted again. 1,247 soldiers, not 900. 1,247. The sergeant had kept sending men down until the mole was clear. Saracen was now carrying 8 times her designed troop capacity. Every square foot of deck space held bodies. The ship sat low in the water. Freeboard reduced from 12 feet to 8 feet. The main deck was barely above the waterline. Maxwell ordered lines cast off. The deck crew struggled to release the mooring ropes. Soldiers were standing on them. They shifted. The ropes came free. Saracen drifted away from the mole at 02:01 hours. Maxwell ordered slow astern. The engines engaged. The ship backed away from the mole. Then Maxwell ordered slow ahead. The destroyer turned in the harbor, threading between wrecks. At 02:07 hours, they cleared the harbor entrance. Maxwell ordered speed 15 knots. Bradford reported immediately from the engine room. The port reduction gear was now at 180 degrees Fahrenheit. It would seize at 200 degrees. Maximum safe speed was 12 knots. Maxwell ordered 15 knots maintained, because 12 knots meant being caught by Stukas at dawn. At 02:19 hours, radar detected aircraft. Bearing 120 degrees, range 12 miles, altitude 6,000 feet, inbound. German reconnaissance plane. It would spot Saracen and radio the position to Luftwaffe bomber squadrons waiting for first light. Maxwell couldn't run. Saracen was overloaded, undermanned for anti-aircraft defense, and making 15 knots maximum. The reconnaissance plane would find them. The question was whether bombers would follow. At 02:27 hours, the radar contact broke off. The German plane turned away without attacking. Reconnaissance only. The pilot had seen them. He'd report the position. Stukas would come at dawn. Saracen continued toward Dover. Maxwell calculated the two timeline. Current position 8 nautical miles from Dunkirk. Distance to Dover 79 nautical miles. Speed 15 knots. Estimated arrival time 05:42 hours. Dawn at 05:15 hours. They'd be 7 nautical miles short of Dover when the sun rose. 7 nautical miles in open water. Perfect target for dive bombers. Maxwell ordered speed increased to 18 knots. Bradford protested. The port reduction gear was at 187 degrees. Increasing speed would push it past failure point. Maxwell overrode the objection. 18 knots or die at dawn. Those were the options. The engine room complied. Speed increased. The reduction gear temperature climbed. At 02:45 hours, a soldier collapsed on the forward deck. Heat exhaustion. The medical section was already full. The man was moved to the rail where air circulation was better. He was the first of many. By 0300 hours, 23 soldiers had collapsed. They'd been standing in the sun for days at Dunkirk, then crammed into a ship with no ventilation. Their bodies were shutting down. The medical officer, Surgeon Lieutenant David Harrison, moved among them with what supplies remained. Water was rationed. 1 cup per man. No exceptions. 1,247 men needed water. The ship carried enough for 145 crew. Harrison made the water last by telling men to hold it in their mouths as long as possible before swallowing. At 03:18 hours, Bradford reported from the engine room. Port reduction gear. Temperature, 196 degrees. Vibration increasing. Metal fatigue imminent. Maxwell acknowledged the report and maintained course and speed, because there was nothing else to do. At 03:34 hours, an explosion. Not from Saracen. From astern. Maxwell turned to see flames rising from the water 4 miles behind them. Another destroyer had hit a mine. The ship was burning. Maxwell couldn't stop, couldn't render assistance, couldn't even break radio silence to report the sinking. He had 1,247 soldiers aboard an overloaded destroyer making 18 knots toward England. Stopping would doom them all. The burning destroyer fell astern. At 04:01 hours, they passed through the Goodwin Sands. Dover was 24 nautical miles ahead. Dawn in 74 minutes. At 04:28 hours, Bradford reported catastrophic failure in the port reduction gear. Temperature 203 degrees. Vibration extreme. The gear was destroying itself. Metal shavings contaminated the lubricating oil. Bearing surfaces were failing. Maxwell ordered engines reduced to 12 knots. The reduction gear temperature dropped to 194 degrees, but 12 knots meant they wouldn't reach Dover before dawn. At 04:43 hours, the first glow appeared on the eastern horizon. At 04:56 hours, the sun broke above the water. Saracen was 11 nautical miles from Dover, full daylight in 15 minutes. The anti-aircraft crews scanned the sky. 12 sailors, manning 3 20mm Oerlikon cannons. They'd been at battle stations for 7 hours. They watched the eastern sky for the distinctive silhouette of Junkers Ju-87 Stukas. At 05:12 hours, they saw them. 6 aircraft, diving from 8,000 feet. The Stukas came in sequence, one after another, precision bombing. The first Stuka rolled into its dive at 0513 hours. The pilot aimed for Saracen's stern. The 20mm guns opened fire. Tracers arced toward the bomber. The Stuka released at 1,500 feet. The 550-pound bomb fell. It missed. The bomb struck water 30 yards to port. The explosion threw a column of water 100 feet high. Shrapnel peppered the ship's side. 2 soldiers on deck were wounded by fragments. The second Stuka dove. The bomb missed by 50 yards. The third Stuka dove. Its bomb missed by 40 yards. The fourth Stuka dove and hit. The bomb struck Saracen forward of the bridge. It penetrated the main deck and detonated in the forward mess. 15 soldiers died instantly. The explosion tore through 2 decks. Fires started immediately. Damage control parties responded. They fought the fires with portable extinguishers and bucket brigades. The ship's water mains had been damaged. High-pressure hoses were useless. Maxwell ordered speed increased to 15 knots despite the damaged reduction gear, because the Stukas were circling for another attack. The 5th and 6th Stukas dove together. Both bombs missed. The Stukas climbed away toward France. Saracen had survived, but the forward section was burning. 15 men were dead. 23 were wounded. The port reduction gear was at 201 degrees and climbing, and Dover was still 8 nautical miles away. At 0534 hours, Maxwell brought Saracen alongside Dover's eastern dock. The destroyer was listing 5 degrees to port. Smoke poured from the forward section. The port engine was running rough, but 1,232 soldiers were alive. 15 had died in the bomb hit. 1,232 had survived. They disembarked down gangplanks onto British soil. Some knelt and kissed the dock. Some collapsed. Some simply walked away in silence. A colonel from the Grenadier Guards was the last to leave. He stopped at the gangway and turned to Maxwell. "How many trips have you made?" "5, Maxwell said. "This was the 5th. The colonel saluted. "Thank you." Maxwell returned the salute. The colonel departed. Saracen's crew secured the ship. Damage control parties extinguished the fires by 0612 hours. The medical section treated casualties. Bradford reported from the engine room. The port reduction gear had seized at 0529 hours, 5 minutes before docking. They'd made it with 300 seconds to spare. Maxwell wrote the after-action report at 0730 hours. HMS Saracen, Operation Dynamo, night of May 31st to June 1st. Departed Dover, 2205 hours. Arrived Dunkirk 0056 hours. Loaded 1,247 soldiers. Departed Dunkirk 0201 hours. Attacked by German aircraft 0512 hours. 1 bomb hit. 15 killed, 23 wounded. Arrived Dover 0534 hours. Port reduction gear failed. Forward section damaged by bomb. Ship requires immediate repair before returning to service. Maxwell recommended Saracen be withdrawn from Operation Dynamo. The Admiralty disagreed. The destroyer was patched, refueled, and sent back to Dunkirk on the night of June 2nd. She made 2 more trips before Operation Dynamo ended on June 4th. Total evacuations, 7 trips. 6,847 soldiers rescued. Saracen survived the war. She served in the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, and the Arctic. She escorted convoys to Malta. She covered the Salerno landings. She hunted U-boats off Iceland. She was finally scrapped in 1948. Robert Maxwell was promoted to commander in September 1940. He commanded the destroyer HMS Highlander through 1942. He survived a torpedo hit in the North Atlantic, brought his damaged ship home, and returned to sea 3 months later. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Order for gallantry and command. Maxwell retired from the Royal Navy in 1956 with the rank of captain. He settled in Cornwall, worked as a harbor master, taught navigation to young sailors. He rarely spoke about Dunkirk. When asked about the night run that saved 1,247 soldiers, he always said the same thing. "We did what was necessary, every ship did. That's why they called it a miracle." Maxwell died on November 8, 1983. He was 77 years old. His obituary in the Times of London mentioned his service record: 16 years in the Royal Navy, 7 trips to Dunkirk, 6,847 soldiers evacuated, 1 bomb hit survived, 1 Distinguished Service Order earned. The obituary called him a hero of Operation Dynamo. Maxwell had called it necessary, because that's what it was. 338,226 soldiers evacuated from Dunkirk between May 26 and June 4, 1940. They were saved by 933 vessels: naval destroyers, merchant ships, fishing boats, pleasure yachts, lifeboats, anything that floated and could cross the channel. The Germans called it the greatest annihilation battle of all time. Churchill called it a colossal military disaster. But 338,226 men came home. They lived to fight another day. They formed the core of the army that would return to France 4 years later. They won the war because men like Maxwell took overloaded destroyers into burning harbors at night and brought them home before dawn. History remembers Dunkirk as a miracle. The men who lived through it remember it differently. They remember the smell of burning oil, the weight of 1,200 soldiers on a deck designed for 200. The sound of bombs falling in darkness, the sight of ships burning on the horizon. And they remember the commanders who refused to accept impossible. Maxwell had been ordered to bring back 900 soldiers. He brought back 1,247 because when the sergeant on the mole kept sending men down, Maxwell kept taking them aboard. That's not a miracle. That's a choice. Every commander at Dunkirk made that choice. Load more soldiers than regulations allowed. Run faster than engines could sustain. Stay longer than safety permitted. Fight harder than training prepared them for. And bring everyone home. 338,226 choices. 338,226 reasons why Britain survived 1940. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about commanders who saved armies with overloaded destroyers and calculated risks. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Robert Maxwell and HMS Saracen don't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.